Hello everybody and welcome to the 7th in the 8-part webinar series that we have available through Incubator Co-op for our members. It's particularly focused for those who are going through our accelerator program. This is the last stage of the accelerator program. We've previously gone through forming, organising, funding, and now we're talking about operation. I'm really excited today to have Tristan Boyd from Slipstream Communications take us through this webinar. I think execution is one of the points where the cooperative and member-owned sector can improve most of all. What has been sensational about the startup culture of late is how efficient they have made their management and how scientifically they've started to work with testing ideas and replicating those hypotheses and then investing funds in them. That sort of startup thinking hasn't been prevalent within the co-op sector, but we can learn a lot from that startup culture in the co-op sector. And that's why I'm really excited to have Tristan here with us today. I'm going to hand over to Tristan now to introduce himself and then take us through his presentation. And we'll have some time for questions at the end. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Tristan. Thank you, Woody. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Pleasure to meet you all virtually. And what I thought I'd do is just give you a little bit of background first in terms of myself and my journey, in terms of where I've come from. So originally I'm a Kiwi, and my journey, I suppose, is that through the founder's eyes. So for the last sort of 20 years, I've been on an entrepreneurial journey of scaling my own shopper marketing agency. So I now live in Australia, and if I had my way, our flag would look something like this. This is my family, my little fella there, my daughter, and my partner on the left. I'm an avid sports fan. I now get to support both sides of the Tasman. I'm about to go through my citizenship. I've lived in Australia now for 11 years. And one of the things that I love about living in Australia is how the Australians celebrate the Anzac spirit, which I think you guys do very, very well. So a little about my journey. I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I have founded and scaled several businesses now. Originally Activate, which was a shopper marketing retail design business, which we scaled into Australia and up into Asia. We then spun off another company, which is a retail analytics business using video analytics, which helped us design the store layouts and optimize them a little bit better. And then we rolled Shopper Answers video analytics technology into Australia's largest people counting and retail analytics business called Bionic, which I'm pleased to say as of about 2 weeks ago, we have just sold. So that's been a bit of a journey, and that's now in the hands of another startup in the Australian ecosystem called Skyfi, which has raised money on the stock exchange, now going to the US. And more recently, Concourse, which is a company that my business partner and I have started, which does a lot of airport work, so fit outs and airports. So my background is around shopper marketing, agency style with technologies and data. So that's kind of my background. And like I said, everything I do is through the eyes of the founder and entrepreneurial journey. A little bit just about an organisation that I'm involved with. So how I met Woody was through Entrepreneurs Organisation. EO is a global organisation that has 160 chapters around the world. If you took the global revenue of EO, we'd be $1 trillion worldwide. If you took the revenue of the combined chapters in Australia, it'd be the 25th largest company by revenue. And if you took just the Sydney chapter, of which I'm on the board of, and I run the programs and the accelerator program for EO, we turn over $2 billion in the New South Wales economy. So I'm a Gazelles coach and one of the founders of the accelerator program for Sydney, and I now sit on the regional and global accelerator program board for EO. So a little bit about the program. We have over 1,300 participants. We're the largest accelerator of our type, and we are truly global. The average age of our accelerator is 38 years of age, more male than female, although we're working on that. And effectively, the reason that this program exists is to help businesses that are sort of turning over a couple of $100,000, scale through what we call that magic million milestone. I'm sure all of you have heard this before, but you know, getting to the first million is probably one of the most difficult journeys that you're going to make on that entrepreneurial journey. So what are the typical challenges that a lot of you are facing? So if you look through some of these, I'm sure they'll be all too familiar. I'm not 100% up to speed on co-ops, although Wardy's given me a fairly good background on them, so I'm by no means an expert, but I'm sure you're all facing similar challenges that most founders face, which is, you know what, we always have cash problems. I'm wearing lots of different hats, constantly trying to look at ways to keep the business funded. I've got to try and work in the business, and I've got to try and work on the business. You know, they're just the typical challenges that most startups and sort of what I call scale-ups face every day, every week, every month. So let's just look a little bit around what I call strategic execution, which is I work with startups all the way through to businesses that are sort of turning over 20, 30, 40 million dollars. It doesn't really matter which part of that journey you're in. We're all facing similar challenges, believe it or not. So one of the big things is obviously the ability to actually execute against a strategy. And that's what is strategic execution? Strategic execution is actually laying out some long-term milestones and objectives and then breaking that down into sprints or key initiatives that are going to allow us to move along that continuum through those strategic milestones. I'm sure that you feel like sometimes you're sort of spinning in business as usual or in the business stuff versus being able to get out and on the business. So today I'm going to sort of go through a little bit around what is it to work in the business and to consciously take time out and put a framework to allow you to work on it. Because we all feel sometimes like we're trapped in BAU. So most organizations have a strategy, but most of them actually fail in the execution of those strategies. So what is strategic execution? Well, with a limited amount of resources, but with an infinite amount of opportunity, strategy is the art of elimination and trade-offs. In other words, strategy is about what you say no to. So I think it's in our nature as entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial mindset to see lots of opportunities. But with a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources, be that financial or human or anything else for that matter, strategy is the art of trade-offs and thinking about how we actually work on the business versus in the business and wear those two hats daily, weekly, monthly, annually toward a strategic milestone. So today, I want us to think about those two things in terms of what does it mean to work on our business versus getting caught up working in it. And strategic execution is the bridge between those two worlds. Okay, so here's a little stat for you. This actually comes out of a book that we're gonna look at, which is the Scaling Up Framework. Now, this is taken from the US, but Australia and New Zealand has a very similar stat in terms of how our business world is made up. And one of the things that this particular graph is showing us is that 97% of businesses in Australia actually earn under $1 million a year in revenue. And when you move over that $1 million mark, which may not sound like a lot, but it's that magic mark that I talked about, you're in an exclusive club of less than 4%. And I think that's something to keep in mind as you go on your journey is there's these things that I call, or that we call, these ceilings of complexity. And those ceilings are around revenue, but they're also around what are the different challenges that you're facing in each of those different modes. So the challenges that you're facing from 0 to your first million will be different when you hit the million mark and scale up and looking to move through to the 5 million mark or onto the 20 million mark. And I call those things the ceilings of complexity. And the framework that I'm about to explain to you will help you smooth out some of those ceilings. It'll never stop them. You'll always hit them. But at the end of the day, it'll help you recognize when you're getting there and then what are the things that I need to focus on in order to be able to move through them. So let's get into it. Has anyone here actually read Scaling Up or understand the Rockefeller habits? No? Okay. So this program is written by a guy called Vern Harnish, who also happens to be one of the founders of Entrepreneurs Organization, which has been around now for 30 years. And the Mastering the Rockefeller Habits has 4 strategic pillars in terms of what it takes to actually scale a business successfully. Now, remembering, it's challenging enough to scale a business in what I call organic growth mode, which is cash flow, work back into working capital, work back into the business to allow you to grow organically. This book is also based around what we call fast growth. So any business that's growing at sort of 30, 40% year-on-year compounded growth is considered a fast growth organization. And there are different complexities that you will face working in organic mode, which, as I said to you, is challenging enough, without then what I call turning up the volume and moving into fast growth mode. So this book enables you to work in both of those modes. And the 4 pillars are strategy, people, execution, and cash. They're the 4 key pillars that you need in order to be able to successfully grow a business in a sustainable manner. And when I mean sustainable, that's holistically. That's founder health, cash flow, the team, the stakeholders that are all around you to grow the organization in a sustainable manner. So today we're going to quickly look at those 4 pillars and what that means. So what you're looking at here is the 1-page strategic plan. And in a roundabout way, the whole book of Scaling Up comes down to this concept, which is how do you create a very simple plan on a page? We can create documents that are 20, 30 pages thick of a business plan, which is fine. But this is the most simplest way that I've ever found. And by the way, I've run all my businesses on this program. So, you know, I'm very much drinking the Kool-Aid and kumbaya in terms of this system works. So the Scaling Up principle effectively has got you working to this thing called a 1-page plan. And if you read through this, you can see the BHAG, or the vision, or the big, hairy, audacious goal, which we're going to talk about later, is for this business to become Australia's #1 slurry recovery recycling processing business. It's got some very clear metrics. And you can literally look at this and understand what this business does, what its core purpose is, what its unique selling proposition is, what's core activities that it does in-house, out-of-house, where it plays, which is its sandpit, the value discipline, which it's looking to focus on and develop best practices in, what its core values are, its 7 to 5 year goals, 3-year strategic objectives they're working toward, and what the business is working on for the next 12 months. And it's this plan that helps you create a long-term vision, but break that down into what are the key milestones that I need to do along the way, and then what am I doing for the next 12 months, and then breaking that down into what I call quarterly sprints. So less is more, keep it simple, stupid, and simplicity is the key to everything. This 1-page plan that the Scaling Up book enables us to develop is a really great way to take something that's sort of quite hard to sort of paint a picture on the end vision, but break it down. It's the bridge between that long-term vision and what do I need to be doing for the next 12 months that this book does really, really well. The other thing the book talks about is execution. So it goes into thinking about a framework that you need to create that allows you to work toward these strategic goals. And I'm sure all of you have got these sort of big strategic goals that you're working toward. And this book allows you to, or this framework allows you to break that down into bite-sized chunks. And what I say to people is, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat it one piece at a time. So execution and putting a framework around the rhythms required to work toward those strategic goals. And whether it's just you, or whether you have a group of stakeholders that you're working with, or eventually, you know, perhaps, you know, people come into your ecosystem and you start to build a team, this framework will give you that, that what I call the cadence, or the rhythms required to complete those tasks. So that's around breaking your week down into what I call sort of what is it that we're working on for the next 12 months? What are we working on for the next quarter that's going to move us toward that 12-month goal? What are we doing for the next month that's working toward the quarterly goal? And what are we doing this week and over the next 4 weeks that's going to work to that monthly target? And then breaking that down into and looking at your day. So this becomes very sort of micro in terms of looking at what is it that I'm doing today and thinking about finding time in your daily schedule to do some of the on the business stuff while working on the in the business stuff. Yeah. So we all know this guy, Bill Gates. He talks about it, that the complexity that we live in these days, we're going to see more change in the next 10 years than we are in the last 50. And we're also going to see that amplified by the fact that we now live in the digital era. And from what I understand, your platforms are very much around this digital concept. And so, you guys are probably part of that, that wave of brutal disruption. But it means that, everything that we're doing is speeding up. And so what I say to people is, if you don't have a framework or a system, and it doesn't matter if it's not scaling up, it could be, there's the entrepreneurial operating system, there are a few different systems around. It doesn't matter which one you use, but trust me, from somebody that's, founded and scaled several businesses now, get a system, because it does make life easier. It's not going to remove the friction and the noise and some of the complexities, but it will make it easier. So through lack of no framework, I implore you and recommend that you adopt some sort of framework that allows you to sort of work in the day-to-day, but also think about what's happening next quarter and next year. So what does this look like? Essentially, it's broken up into these 4 cornerstones, which is around strategic execution, setting the right vision. Where am I going? Why am I doing what am I doing? Where do we want to be 3 to 5 years from now? And what does the 1-year plan look like? That's around strategic intent and the execution against that intent. We've also got leadership, people, and culture. So everything that we do involves people. And as we start to evolve and we have more stakeholders in our ecosystem, we need to create this high performance ecosystem, which is everybody working toward the same strategic objectives, the same agenda. I call them A players, and that's not just by execution, that's also in terms of their ability to get things done, but by the attitude and the type of values that they display in terms of how we all work together. So once we've set the right strategic intent, we've got the right people executing on the right things. We've also got to think about what I call the sales and marketing hustle. Nothing in the world ever happens without a sale. So thinking about how do we generate leads, which I call lead generation, and how do we convert them, which I call lead conversion or sales, is also really, really important. And then finally, what I call financial and capital, discipline, which is around knowing your numbers, understanding the financial side of the business, which is cash flow, financial dashboards, and everything else. They are the 4 cornerstones that we work toward as part of a scaling up program. So let's start with the vision and the strategy. Strategy really is just a fancy word for coming up with a long-term plan and putting it into action. But in order for us to actually have a plan, we need a vision. And this is one of the great statements that I've seen. We all know who this guy is and the impact that he made on the world. But he said, if you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision will pull you and every other stakeholder in your ecosystem. So the first thing that we need to do is create a worthy and I suppose impactful and exciting vision, an end state. And one of the best books that I guess I've ever read around this is a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I'm going to leave you with some reading material at the end of this presentation that you guys can go away and potentially put into your reading material or onto Audible if you like to listen to the books. But he talks about, Jim Collins talks about that, just a bit of background on this. Jim studied Fortune 500 businesses and then looked at the top performing of those 500 businesses in terms of who actually showed fast growth for 5 years or 50% or more year on year, and what were the things that they all had in common? What were the things that they did that seemed to, unite them in terms of what made a good business a great business? And he talks about those things in the book. But the one thing that he talks about is getting the vision is really important. But once you've got the vision, right, the hard part is alignment of all the stakeholders around that vision. So he says it's about 1% vision and 99% alignment. And in that book, he talks about what is it that you're deeply passionate about, which I'm sure you guys can define that because you wouldn't be in this seminar today if you didn't know that. But do you know what drives your economic engine? So he talks about focusing on your critical numbers. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And what is it that you can be the best in the world at? Where is it that you can disrupt And he talks about that as your hedgehog concept. So getting really, really clear on what that hedgehog concept looks like in terms of your defensible position. And in the middle of that is your BHAG, or your big, hairy, audacious goal. So Good to Great is a great read, and it also forms part of the Scaling Up framework. And really, the Scaling Up framework has taken 100 years of business best practice and put it into a system. So the other thing that we talk about in the vision aspect is your core purpose. So why do you get up every day and do what you do? And why is it that your organization does what it does? Because that's kind of the soul. The vision is the exciting part of where we want to go. But in order to get there, and I'm sure as you guys and girls all know right now, you know what? It takes a lot of passion, perseverance, persistence, and patience to actually, make this happen. You have to understand what your why is, because it's the why that's going to break you through those days where you just go, my goodness, this is quite hard. And sometimes you just want to go, why am I doing this? And so for those of you that don't know who this guy is, Simon Sinek is probably one of the best books that you'll read, which is sort of start with the why. And he talks about people don't buy what you do. People don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And he gives a really great example. So if you want to make a note now, go to I think it's the third most popular TED Talk ever. Simon Sinek, Start With Why, and he does a great little 20-minute TED Talk around the why, if you haven't already done it. So once you've got a BHAG and you understand your why, and you've got your end vision, we've got to think about all the people involved in this, the stakeholders, as I call them. And the other thing that we've got to be really, really careful of is that while we might have a great strategy, the culture or the ability for people to be able to execute against the plan is paramount. And this statement of culture eats strategy for breakfast is true. I can have the best strategy in the world, but if I don't have people following me and I don't have people in my ecosystem, my stakeholders helping me work every day, every week, every month toward those strategic milestones, I'm never going to achieve those strategic goals. So people and culture is the next thing we're going to look at. And Good to Great talks about getting the right people on the bus. So your bus is your co-op, and you're the driver of this bus, and you've decided in your BHAG or your vision the direction that you're going in. And your guys' job as the leaders or the founders of this co-op is to actually get the right stakeholders on the bus. And they will be the co-op stakeholders, investors, participants, team members that might help you with the execution piece, some of the other co-op members that might be involved in actually delivering whatever it is that you're delivering. You've got to get the right people that share the same values as you on the bus, and then make sure that they're all kind of sitting in the right seats and doing what they're meant to be doing, working towards similar goals and objectives. And remember that, in the continual evolution of this fast-moving world that we're in, if we're not actually aligning everybody and we're actually kind of spinning or standing still, we're actually moving backwards. So getting everybody aligned and on the same page or on the same bus is really, really important. And Jim Collins talks about in this book also that he'll come into organizations and sometimes it's about getting some people off the bus because they're just the wrong people, because you know what? It's about getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. We also talk about in Scaling Up around A players. And A players are people that have the right attitude, have the right values, and also about getting things done and getting results. And we break those down into what we call A players, the people that are results driven, get stuff done, and have the right values and right attitudes along the way. We've got B players that perhaps aren't always getting the results, but have the right attitude. We can train for that. We can help them, focus on the right results. And then we've got what we call C and D players. So it's about shoring what do A players look like, how to recruit and bring on board the right A players in order to help us go about our strategic execution. I'm going quite quickly here, team, so just bear with me because I want to leave lots of time open at the end for questions and clarification. So once we've got the right strategy and the right vision and we understand our why and we've got the right people on the bus with the right values that share our values, we've then got to go about the execution piece, which is, where rubber hits the road. And this is one of my favorite sayings. I don't know if any of you have read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, but it's a book that's thousands of years old, written by a great Chinese general. But this book's quite applicable in modern business and life today. And he talks about a strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without a strategy is the noise before defeat. So we can have the best strategy in the world, but if we don't have the right execution and tactics in order to go about executing on the strategy, then we've just got a whole lot of chaos and noise, and we're not actually well organized, and we're not focusing our resources in the right directions as and when required to execute on those strategic milestones. So I'm sure we've all felt this way, or we feel this way some days, where we can't see the forest from the trees. And what the scaling up framework allows you to do is to put things into boxes, to be able to sort of sort things into in the business and on the business. And I'll explain what that looks like in a little bit more detail later on. But the first thing is actually looking at prioritizing. So understanding what are the key metrics that we're working towards, which is the KPIs. In other words, you know, how do we actually measure what we do every day and every week versus what we call an objective key result or a ROC. An objective key result or a ROC is a large, long-term, larger project that we're putting in place that's working toward a bigger milestone. So for example, you guys might be developing out a platform right now. That's a strategic project. And you have to break that down into small pieces. It might be, we've got to get it designed and scoped, and then we've actually got to start building different parts of it. We've got to build a brand. That's breaking that down into smaller strategic pieces, and they've got to be executed on every day, every week, every month, every quarter, on time, to a budget. So an objective key result are those projects that are broken down into smaller parts. And this framework will allow us to think about what are we doing day to day versus the month to month, quarter to quarter pieces, and focusing on the right things and prioritizing them. The other piece that's required around execution is what we call meeting cadences. So having the right meetings happening at the right time. And Scaling Up talks about this in terms of you should look to do an annual kickstart, and the kickstart will be planning the year ahead. Then you start to break that down into what is it that we're going to go away and do this quarter, that if we only get that one thing done, that's the most important thing we get done for the quarter. And then we break that down into quarterly key milestones into monthly little sprints in terms of at the end of every month coming together and looking at how we're going on the quarterly goal. And then we break the monthly down into weekly whips. So what are we doing on a Monday to Friday? What are the key priorities? What are the things we need to do? Now we're more in the business, broken down into the daily tasks. So what is it that I'm going to do today that's going to get me there for the week? It's going to get me there for the quarter. So I'll just go back. So running effective meetings is a really key part of the scaling up piece. In other words, we can waste a lot of time bringing stakeholders together, having meetings where there's a lot of talking. And so Scaling Up has a very specific framework around how do you run a meeting, which is you always have an agenda, you always come prepared, you always have actions and outcomes at the end of every meeting, and there's a very strict time frame and agenda that you work toward. So thinking about the fact that you've got 5 or maybe 10 heads sitting there for 60 minutes, that's a compounding, multiplying effect. So running effective meetings is a very key part of the execution process. So I've talked a little bit around the execution piece, but Scaling Up talks about prioritizing. And effectively, we've got so many things that we need to do every day, every week, every month. The Scaling Up framework talks about what are the top 3 things that you're going to work on for the year? What are the top 3 things that you're going to work on for the quarter? And what are the top 3 things that you're going to work on for the month, the week, and the day? Everything is broken down into those top 3. In other words, there may be more things to do, but there's only so much time in a day. And if I only get those 3 things done, then that's been a good productive day. And the other thing that the framework talks about is what we call our green frog. And the green frog is another great book, but effectively the green frog is that thing that we always are faced with every other day that we keep putting off, or that we know we need to get done, or that we sort of keeps us up at night. It always says, eat the green frog first. Like, make that the one thing that you get done. And even if it's a big thing, you put an hour aside every morning and work toward that over the week or the month. Always eat the green frog first. And I'm sure we all know what they are, and we've got examples of those probably, right now, that are sitting in the back of our head going, geez, I really need to get that thing done. So we also need to think about the sort of the on the business pieces. So that's where we do the annual kickstart and look ahead, and where we do the quarterly and the monthly sort of get-togethers with the stakeholders and look at how we're going on the long-term strategic stuff. The weeklies and the dailies are more in the business. So again, I want you thinking about the on the business versus the in the business actions and tasks to get things done. And I guess the one thing about execution is this great quote, which once upon a time, we lived in a world where it was large organizations with lots of money and lots of resources, beating small organizations that were under-resourced. But Rupert Murdoch said this probably about 10 years ago now, but the world's changing very fast. It won't be big beating small, it'll be fast beating slow. And I guess that's the key thing around execution is execute with speed and prioritize what you're working on. The most important tasks for the day, the week, the month, and the quarter. So the other piece that we need to think about while we're working through this framework is what I call the single source of truth. In other words, measuring everything that we do. So this is an example, and kind of getting into that, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. This is an example of a one-page plan. So what you're looking at here is on the left-hand side of the page is over this course of the quarter, you will work on what's my vision, where am I going, what's my long-term goal, what's my core purpose, why do we exist, why do I get up every day and do this, what geographic space are we looking to play in, who are my target customers, and I'm sure you're doing some of this work as part of your accelerator, your brand promise and sort of what are you doing in-house and what are you going to do out-of-house. The left-hand side of your one-page plan is sort of longer term and doesn't really change. Once you've got it, it's sort of set in stone. You might look at it once a year, you might look at it, every quarter, but generally speaking, that's set in stone. Then in the top right, you've got your 3 to 5 year strategic plan. These are the big, juicy projects that you need to put into place in order to put the building blocks of the foundations to allow you to move along the continuum to build your organization or your co-op. And they need to be broken down into, smaller chunks of work and allocated resources. And it may take you a couple of years to work through. Sometimes it might take you 3 to 5 years to work through some of those big strategic pieces. Jeff Bezos and Amazon have been working on the same big, hairy, audacious goal for the last 25 years. And he's been pretty much probably working towards some of the same strategic objectives for the last 10 to 15. He's just been breaking them down into, as and when technology and markets, require whatever it is that the vision has outlined, putting them in play as and when timing allows you. So the top right-hand page of your one-page strategic plan are those big strategic milestones, and then looking at your strengths and weaknesses of you as an organisation to allow you to actually go and execute against those strategic milestones. And then the bottom part of this page is breaking your year down in terms of what am I going to do for the next 12 months and how do they actually cascade up into what I'm doing for the next 3 to 5 years, and then breaking those down into 90-day sprints. And then what are the metrics that we're going to put around those 90-day sprints in terms of how do I measure what it is that we're doing, and keeping everybody accountable to those key tasks. So we then look at the metrics piece, which is the dashboard and the visibility, or what I call the single source of truth, so that everybody knows what is it that we're working on, what is it that we're moving toward, and aligning and allocating our resources in a clear, concise manner. So having data is a really key part of that. And I just want to ask, does anybody know what's special about the North Star?
You can't say it from Australia or New Zealand?
That's one thing, Woody. That's very clever. Yep. Any other ideas about the importance of the North Star and why it's important?
You can usually find your way if you can see it.
That's exactly right.
The Southern Cross is my version in our hemisphere.
Correct. And you're right, there are fixation points in the Southern Hemisphere as well. So ancient mariners would use the North Star, and there is a constellation in the Southern Hemisphere that they use to navigate from. And this is actually sort of a buzzword or a bit of a framework now that's starting to come through in America, but it's around what's your North Star metric? What's the one, back to the scaling up principles, critical number or data point that you're using to be able to track your progress toward your goal or your objective? Now, there'll be other metrics involved, but effectively getting really, really clear on that one key metric is really, really important because it helps everybody understand how you're making progress. So for a typical organization, it might be revenue. It could be profitability. It might be some sub-metrics around our net promoter score with our customers, or ticketing in terms of service level support or maintenance. Every department has a different metric, but each of those department metrics ladders up into that North Star metric. In other words, each metric needs to affect or have an effect on the North Star metric. So you might want to give some thought in terms of, I always use revenue in organizations from the perspective of, if we turned over $1 million this year and we turn over $2 million next year, that tells the team, hey, we've doubled our output, we've doubled our delivery, our productivity from where we were last year. So it's really, really important to have metrics to help everybody understand, where we've come from, and more important, where we're going. So the scaling up framework starts to take the following pieces, which is, once we've completed our one-page plan, and again, you'll be able to look at it in a glance and say, this is who we are, this is our vision, this is where we're going, these are our core values, these are our 7-year goals, these are our 3-year strategic initiatives that we're working toward, and these are the things that we're prioritizing we're going to work on for the next 12 months. We put a dashboard in place that we keep coming back to every week for the work in progress. What are we working on this week? What are we prioritizing? Remembering, we've only got so much time, so much resource to allocate daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, right? So we have this thing called a company dashboard. And how it works is, every week and every month, you'll come together and you'll bring the stakeholders in. And even if it's for you, it helps you prioritize what you're doing. And it says, what are the tasks that I'm working on today? Again, prioritizing what are the top 3 things I want to get done for the day, the top 3 things I want to get done for the week, and tracking them. And how it tracks is that you'll see here, the 1-year infrastructure plan is sitting here. It's quite hard maybe to see on the screen, but down the bottom here, you've got your 1-year plan, which will be putting in an infrastructure or platform. How far are we into that in terms of percentage complete? And a traffic light system in terms of, is it on track, green? Is it going off track, orange? Or do we have a problem with it and it's red? So everybody in the business can see what we're working on and the status of those different things. It's a really great way for you to be able to, again, get a perspective on your on the business versus in the business activities, because sometimes it can become quite overwhelming trying to separate those 2 things out. So one of the final pillars that I want to talk about, after you've got the right vision and strategy, you've got your 1-page plan sorted out, you've got all the stakeholders involved and motivated and working toward common tasks and common initiatives. We've got our execution cadences set up, regular meetings, we're tracking people and making them accountable to the tasks, keeping ourselves to account, getting the right kind of values happening and buzz within the organization is leadership. And I wanted to talk about leadership from the perspective of, you guys are leading, your organizations, your co-ops. And again, going back to the analogy, you've built this bus, you're driving the bus, and you're taking people in a particular direction. But effectively, leadership is very holistic. And I guess I just wanted to get you guys to think about a few things around leadership. So the first thing is around looking at yourself as a personal brand. We're all personal brands every day in what we do. And you're a personal brand attached to this brand, which is your co-op. And so you need to understand that first of all, you have a personal brand. And your brand isn't also just about being at work. It's actually about how you project yourself in your life and all other parts of your life. It's quite a holistic thing. You need to understand what are the key drivers of your personal brand. So how are you made up and what is it that's sort of part of your DNA and your value system? And understand how you see yourself and potentially how others see you. And I do a lot of work with organizations around understanding the difference between sort of how you see yourself, how others see you, and somewhere in the middle of those two worlds is actually your real personal brand. And understanding that, you know, us as leaders every other day, it's not an easy thing to be out there doing what we're doing. And I guess I share this with you in terms of there's a lot of leadership books out there, and I can recommend a whole lot. But in terms of you guys on your own journey, you know what? It's really tough doing what we all do every other day in terms of the entrepreneurial journey and going about what we do. And I guess this was shared with me by somebody that's sort of doing work around modern leadership. But it talks about the 3 pillars of modern leadership, which is EQ, IQ, and AQ. And IQ is kind of how good are you from a skill base and your kind of understanding of what you do. And I say to people, you know, if you're sitting in a leadership team or you're running your own business or you're running your own co-op, you know, they're kind of table stakes. You are where you are because of your skill base, right? So tick the box and you're probably there because you're good at what you do. But there's this other piece around emotional intelligence, which is EQ. And emotional intelligence is the ability for you as a leader to regulate and control your emotions. And it's not easy, right? It's a pretty lonely place being a founder. And so sometimes you find yourself in some places where you're like, man, this is hard work. You know, I've been there. I know, you know, Woody's been there in his journey, and I'm sure you guys have all faced this in past situations or where you are right now. But that ability to be able to helicopter out and look at things objectively and you know, self-regulate in terms of being able to look at things in perspective is really important. So EQ is around the ability to monitor and look at your own emotions and how external stimuli or the pressures of what we're doing every day affect us. And then how we actually internalizing those pressures, those stimuli, and then how we're projecting ourselves in terms of how we behave. And then the second part of that EQ piece is how are we affecting others. So I work a lot with leaders that are in fast growth businesses with all the complexities that come with fast growth, you know, cash constantly being a problem. Fast growth businesses suck cash, managing people, managing stakeholders, managing suppliers, managing shareholders and investors. You know, there's a lot of pressures and strains. So how we project onto others as leaders is really, really important. And more importantly, our ability to read everybody else in our ecosystem and see how they're responding and how they're behaving in terms of, you know, those pressures they may be facing with you. It's not an easy place. We've got to put on our smiley faces every day and come in and, you know, try and be the bigger person and lead by example. And then the final piece is adaptability, which is we are in a fast-paced, ever-moving, disruptive world. So things are constantly changing and they're constantly coming at us. So again, our ability to sort of be adaptable and adapt and change and quickly pivot is a really key skill in the modern world, and to be adaptable. And then that loops back around into the EQ piece again, and around the circle we go. So I just wanted to share that with you in terms of, you know, leadership's a really important part of the journey, working toward that strategic goal and getting everybody motivated and focused around those strategic objectives. And then finally, you know, this whole framework is there in order for you to be able to sort of create some order out of probably what's organized chaos sometimes. And one of the most important things that I think is, you know, it's all the little things that you do every day that compound, like compounding interest, that build up to get you to those weekly, monthly milestones that become all of a sudden bigger quarterly milestones that move you toward, oh my goodness, over 12 months, look what we've achieved. And when you look back over 2 or 3 years, you can see, wow, look at some of the big strategic pieces that we've put in place. But this is all around the discipline and the consistent effort of execution against those objectives that are ultimately the key to success. And there's some really great books that I'm going to recommend for you to read as part of this. And one of them is The E-Myth. It was one of my first books that I ever read on my entrepreneurial journey, a great book by a guy called Michael Gerber. In terms of when you're at the early stages of your journey, this book is a great book. The other piece is a book by James Clear, which is called Atomic Habits. And effectively, you know, we've all got these rather large, you know, visions or, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals. And we sometimes look at them and go, my goodness, how are we going to get there? this book is talking about literally it's the 1%, it's the small things that we do every day that, you know, we may not think are making a difference, but when they add up, they have this compounding effect. And so I would, you know, recommend the book Atomic Habits. And then finally, another read would be Good to Great. In other words, what makes a good business or a good organization great, written by Jim Collins. All great books, and I'd fully recommend them. So that's a quick 45 minutes on the Scaling Up framework. And I guess I'll open the floor up now to questions.
Thank you, Tristan. That was awesome. I'm sure that there are plenty of questions. We have online people from Loconomics, Barossa Valley Community Energy, and Chooks SA. So do any of those three have particular questions for Tristan, maybe about how to take the 1-year plan and break it into executable pieces or something along those lines? Might be easier if I ask specifically. Chooks, Moira, is there anything in there for you that you've got a question about?
Yeah, I'm interested, Tristan, just applying a bit of a gender lens to all of this stuff. You said right at the very beginning that, you know, you didn't have too many women involved in EO. And I'm just wondering what some of the strategies have been, or what some of the learnings you might, if you can see any gender differentials, like if you do apply a gender lens to this stuff. So much of it, in my experience, is very masculine and is missing some of the new evidence that's coming out quite significantly around the EQ, the IQ and the AQ, which is, you know, collaboration is actually probably one of the most important new secret sources that everyone's understanding. So I'd be interested in your reflections on that.
Yeah, great question. So as part of my board role with Entrepreneurs Organisation, I've got programs, and under programs, I've actually got Women of EO. So EO is completely committed to trying to, the ultimate goal is obviously parity, 50-50. And what I can say to you is that Sydney actually won an award last year. We've got 30% female to males in our chapter. We are about double the average NEO globally, which is good, but by no means is that our end goal. The one thing that I would say to you is it's something near and dear to my heart. So my mother was a founder and an entrepreneur. She ran the businesses. I've got a 21-year-old daughter who's, I hope one day she might be able to do her own thing. So I guess the thing for me is there a gender bias on this stuff? No. A lot of the ladies in our EO use the Scaling Up framework. We've got probably about 20% in our accelerator program. This is all around accountability to strategic goals and milestones, but it does have the values, people and culture piece in it, which then comes across into your nuances of collaboration and emotional intelligence. I guess the piece for me is around effective leadership and the differences in terms of male and females, not so much an agenda piece, but moving away from what I call a command and control style, management style, which is do as I say and get it done, versus a coaching, mentoring type management style. And I think females, and I'm generalizing here, are more in the mentoring and sort of the coaching style sometimes than perhaps some of their male counterparts. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And also just the evidence is showing that these are the skills and qualities that you actually need for the 21st century. And a lot of the early work around entrepreneurialism and the codification that, you referred to with Jim Collins' work, and also, the work that has been done historically, even by people like Gates, etc. It is coming out of a particular cultural lens. And when I think about the Australian environment, and also not just for gender, but around, Indigenous business and all that kind of thing too, just generally speaking, diversity requires some increased complexity around leadership and management style. I think if you're really going to do, if everyone's the same, it's often brings its own challenges, but there is some less is lost in translation. So if we start to look at what the, like in an investment, for example, you know, less than 4% of women are getting VC funds. So what does that mean, and why is that happening, and what does that mean? So for me, that's around the pipeline. So I really appreciate everything you've said today. It's been really helpful. And I'm just wondering how, reflecting that back on the work that I'm doing, and what can we do to even strengthen that more in terms of bringing agenda, because we do have unconscious bias, whether we like it or not, that, you know, all of us do. So what can we do to keep...
Well, we could spend another hour on that, and that's near and dear to my heart. And diversity is about inclusiveness, not exclusiveness. So, you know, I work with Indigenous culture in New Zealand. I'm working with iwi on some roll-ups at the moment. That's very humbling to see a 100-year vision rather than a 10-year BHAG. They're about intergenerational 100-year visions, and to have 3 generations sit in a room on a strategic plan. The point is, whether it's a group of female entrepreneurs, whether it's a group of Indigenous entrepreneurs, this framework creates focus, creates alignment, and allows you to allocate your resources, which doesn't matter how big an organisation you are, whether you're 1 person, whether you're 1,000 people, there is only so much time, so much resource. This framework, in its most basic form, will help you allocate that resource and track progress. Cool. Any other questions, statements?
Rachel or Brian from Barossa Renewable Energy, any questions?
I haven't got a question. Have you, Rachel?
No, I'm still
I just want some time to digest this stuff. But thanks, Tristan, because it's we can look at it on the recording and take it in.
Well, look, I'll say this. One of the things that I will do is I'm happy to do a little breakout session for an hour and actually get down into what are the key questions that you need to ask to complete the 1-page plan. I do a lot of work with investors, with startups and raising money, and I insist that they work on the 1-page plan as part of getting investor ready, because this actually goes into the IM as a clear, concise page around what our plan is on a page. And everybody that looks at it from an investment point of view goes, I get it. I get who you are. I get where you're going. I can see your strategic objectives. I know months. It's a really great way to create clarity for everybody around that. So I'm happy to have another session booked and actually offer up the co-op group some worksheets to work through to enable you to actually get your 1-page plans complete. And it's probably, you know, it's probably 8 to 10 hours work to get it done, but it's a great starting point, and will give you clarity for your journey.
So what's the chance of getting hold of some worksheets, Tristan?
The chances are 100%.
Hey Tristan, so it's Sam here from Loconomics. Was that an offer for an hour for each co-op, or as a
group? As a group, I will take you through the basics of completing the 1-page plan, and then set you guys some homework to go away and complete them, and then I'll do an hour over the course of a month maybe to go away and get this done, and then have a bit of a let's all sit down and quickly present and review each other's. So yeah, if you want to take me up on that offer, I'm happy to help.
That sounds like a pretty generous offer, Tristan.
You're welcome.
TJ, thank you for that. I'll organise and keep everybody up to date on this. While we've got you here, Sam, have you got any questions specific to Tristan that could be useful for Loconomics to address?
I was thinking, he's kind of answered my question anyway, but maybe I'll just say what I was thinking. So I was thinking, like, you're talking a lot about leadership, but how does that translate to a co-op where decisions are made by potentially a relatively large group? To me, it sounds like it complicates the situation, but you feel like it would still work within that framework?
Yeah, look, let me start with an organisation, and then you'll understand. Perhaps I can make the analogy. And look, I get the complexities of co-ops. One of my mentors, a guy called Tony Falkenstein, who's sort of one of New Zealand's not so famous entrepreneurs, but very well respected, said to me, you know, Tristan, committees of one work a whole lot better than committees of many. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge that you guys face, right? But what I would say is one of my philosophies is a lot of coaches that work in the space only ever work with the leadership teams. So I'll say, let's sit in a room and I'll work with the leadership team. And it's the leadership team's job to go away and embed this into the culture of the business, because this is actually about behaviors as much as anything else, right? So my philosophy is it's a top-down, bottom-up. In other words, my job is I work with an entire organization. I've got 50 people sitting in a room doing this one-page plan, right? Because what it creates is a common vision. It creates a common framework in which people can move towards some strategic objectives together. But if people can't see it, if people can't understand it and put it into bite-sized chunks, it becomes very, very difficult. And if I bring you back to the start of the Good to Great, remember Jim Collins said it's about 1% vision and 99% alignment. Your biggest challenge must be surely alignment of everybody in the co-op towards some strategic objectives, some strategic goals. Because if we're not moving towards something, I've got a question, well, why are we doing it? So this framework, however it's adopted for a co-op situation, the one thing it will give you the vision, but it'll give you the alignment. And that's all you can ever do is allocate and align everybody toward a common goal or a common vision. So I'm very much around working with the whole ecosystem with a bottom-up, top-down. And coming back to Atomic Habits, it's about getting everybody doing small things along the way toward a common goal. So if there's a platform play or an objective that you're working toward that has multiple stakeholders in it, you've got to divide those resources up and get people working toward them. You need visibility of what is it that we're working toward and how does that fit in as part of a vision or an objective we're working toward 5 years from now, and how does that piece work in terms of a project 3 years from now, and what are we working on for the next 12? It all kind of comes back to this kind of framework. So yeah, I get the unique challenges that you guys face. I just suggest that it could be adopted maybe a little bit differently in order to give everybody visibility around and transparency what you're doing.
Great, thanks. That's helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, TJ. There's probably time for one more question if somebody has one. Otherwise, Moira, I can see you starting to talk. Go on, finish it.
My question was, Tristan, and thanks so much for that last answer, which is one comes a little bit like it, is what do you think is the single most important thing to hold on tight to in the culture piece? And, you know, what do you hold loose?
Okay. So this is quite a difficult concept for some people to wrap their head around. Is values, right? The one thing that I've learned about business, the one thing that I've learned about culture is, and you know what? The one thing about life and values, maybe as I've got a little bit older, I've got a little bit wiser, is values, right? Is you have to be aligned with people who share your values, who share the same values as you. That can become quite a fuzzy thing to try and define, but if you keep coming back to here are the values that I'm aligned with, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, you know, and I think probably co-ops more than maybe even, you know, other organizations, this is probably more relevant, is if people aren't aligned to your values, then you know what, it's not going to work over the long term. So the lessons that I've learned time and time again is I've gotten, for example, this is sort of coming from experience, I got involved in a business dealings where I got involved for a backdoor listing for quick, easy money. It was the most arduous stressful 2 years of my life that I'll never get back. And so I realized that I wasn't aligned on the same value system as those people. I ignored it and I paid the consequences. So values is a really great way of filtering the people that come into that ecosystem and saying, like EO has its 5 values. If you don't have a thirst to learn and a thirst to grow, EO is not for you, right? So, and when you're in the day-to-day grind of doing what you're doing, you can also call people out on the values. So you hire and fire on values. So for example, one of my values is be your word. And it's quite an all-encompassing word, but be your word is say what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it. And in a working world, that is, if you say you're going to get something for me by, 5 o'clock today and you don't, then I expect to hear about it and go, hey, I'm not getting it done. This is why. I'm like, okay, cool. We'll reset. But one of the things I can't tolerate is getting to 5 o'clock and I go, hey, Maura, how did you go? And you go, I didn't get it done. And you know what? I'm not going to get it done. But I had to ring you and follow you up. They're things that, they're just not tolerated by me. That doesn't mean that people don't have real reasons why they don't get things done. But so for me, be your word is a value that I hold true in any project group, any working group, any culture. And that goes back to me. You should be able to call me out and go, hey, Tristan, you said you were going to do this workshop. We booked it in. We've got it done. Be your word. Show up. Get it done.
Thank you.
Tristan, awesome stuff. I'll talk with you offline and organise for this follow-up 1-year plan. It sounds like it might be a beginning and end of the process piece. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everybody else. Join us next week for the last of the Accelerator cohort's webinars. I think it's been a success for Incubator Co-op, so I'm expecting that we'll be continuing with Monday webinars. However, we'll probably start diving into other bits of content from existing cooperative founders. So stay tuned to that. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day. Cheers.
Thank you, Woody.